It is the first day of a new school year, and Cynthia is helping her two children prepare for the day. Her son Matt is starting 5th grade, while her daughter Sari is entering 1st grade. Cynthia has already dropped off the supplies the kids will need at school. Matt's supplies included notebooks, pencils, scissors, and colored pencils. Sari's items were crayons, markers, scissors, pencils, and a mat for rest time. Sari is nervous, but also excited. She needs help packing and zipping her backpack, which Cynthia does while preparing her breakfast and packing her lunch and a snack. While she eats her breakfast, Sari talks about being excited and not sitting in the kindergarten section of the bus this year. She also asks whether she will need to write both her first and last name. Matt has just finished dressing himself, although his clothes do not match. Cynthia is encouraging independence, so she simply praises him for getting ready. She supervised as he packed his own lunch, but encouraged him to choose between a few healthy options, and they've agreed he will have school lunches twice a week. She talks to Matt about his school schedule, which includes daily time for reading and math, but not for recess. Matt worries that he will not be able to sit all day. He also worries about how much homework he will have and whether he will have time to play with friends. At the same time, he is excited to be in the oldest grade in the school and assures Sari that he will be able to show her around and introduce her to all the teachers. As Cynthia watches Matt and Sari board the school bus, she finds herself wondering, will Sari have the fine motor skills she needs to be able to tie her shoes and write her name? How much sleep will Sari and Matt need to be successful learners? Would it be better for 5th graders to still have a daily recess time? Will the school lunches provide the nutrition that Sari and Matt need? This chapter discusses what to expect for both physical and cognitive development in children who are in middle childhood. Kalafishik is outside with his friends after school. They are playing baseball, but because there are only 6 of them today, they are coming up with creative ways to make the game work. Arif is having a great time because he knows that he has really improved over the last few months in hitting and catching. He has been practicing with his uncle regularly and feels much more relaxed and capable. A year ago, he would have gone straight home and skipped the neighborhood game, but he is now taller, stronger, and more confident in his skills. As children move into middle childhood, they still look like little kids, but by the end of middle childhood, many have had a growth spurt and begin to look like adolescents. In addition to changes in physical growth, children are experiencing changes in gross motor skills and are becoming more coordinated. Lima et al., 2017. These changes allow them to be more capable when engaged in physical activities, such as climbing a tree, playing tag, or having a neighborhood game of baseball. Similarly, the continuing development of fine motor skills is important for improving skills such as writing. Changes in nutritional and sleep needs and health issues are other important aspects of physical development during middle childhood. Physical growth and development. Although there are a lot of individual differences during middle childhood, physical growth continues to happen in some predictable ways. As children move into middle childhood, they have often lost the rounded bellies and full faces associated with early childhood, and have a leaner appearance. There are not many sex differences at this point. Boys and girls are similar in size and body shape, although girls are often slightly smaller than boys. Lazara, 2020. Children now grow steadily, if more slowly than earlier in life, adding approximately 2 to 3 inches in height, and adding about 5 to 7 pounds per year in weight until they reach puberty. Lazara, 2020. Around age 7, children average 44 inches tall and 50 pounds, but by age 11, girls average 52 inches tall and 82 pounds, and boys average 52 inches tall and 77 pounds. Towards the end of middle childhood, as girls enter puberty, which typically occurs a few years earlier than for boys, they tend to be larger than boys of the same age. However, once boys begin puberty, the height and weight gap generally disappears, and in most cases, boys will grow taller and weigh more than girls. Lazara, 2020. Hereditary differences in things like potential height and the growth spurts that can occur during middle childhood, however, lead to wide variability in size. Several factors may influence how quickly children grow, including genetics and environmental factors. Genes determine about 80% of adult height, while the other 20% is influenced by environmental factors. Perkins et al., 2016. A lack of protein in the diet and childhood disease are particularly important environmental influences on height. Bodzoli et al., 2009. Koletsko et al., 2014. Nutritional deficits can lead to stunted growth, which often persists and can get worse if malnourishment continues. Kitsao Wekulo et al., 2013. Furthermore, Stunted growth in school-aged children is often associated with other concerns, including behavior problems and cognitive deficits. Hodinot et al. 2013. Other environmental factors include prenatal development resources, such as maternal nutrition, severe neglect, Nelson et al. 2019, and even the family's socioeconomic status, SES, or the wealth of the country or region they live in. Fox and Heaton 2012, Mum et al. 2016. For example, children in wealthier countries, living in more urban areas, or from families with better economic and educational resources, often are physically healthier and have better nutrition outcomes. Fox and Heaton 2012, Mum et al. 2016, Shell et al. 2009. Toward the end of middle childhood, some children may have a growth spurt as they begin the process of puberty, the stage in which they sexually mature as they prepare to enter adolescence. Around ages 6 to 8, the groundwork for puberty is being set by greater production of hormones from the adrenal glands. Mendel et al. 2019. These hormones prepare the body for physical maturation. However, the onset of true puberty, including changes in physical characteristics like voice changes and increased body hair, does not occur until later, between 8 and 13 years of age for girls, and between 9 and 14 years of age for boys. Ferrello et al. 2020. Puberty typically lasts between 2.5 and 4 years. Chang et al. 2019. A variety of hereditary and environmental factors can influence the timing of puberty. You will learn more about this in 9.1 Physical Growth and Development in Adolescence. Along with the body, the brain experiences a growth spurt early and middle childhood and reaches 95% of its adult size between 7 and 8 years of age. Thompson et al. 2020. Although there is very little change in the number of neurons from infancy to adulthood, the brain develops in very important ways during childhood. During this stage of development, new synaptic connections continue to form between areas of the brain that are responsible for sensory and motor skills, and myelination increases. Buyanova and Arsaladou, 2021. The continued development of myelin across early and middle childhood partially explains why children show increased efficiency in reaction times and information processing abilities. Chevalier et al. 2015, Scantlebury et al. 2013. As a result, children will be able to perform tasks that require faster reaction times, such as catching a ball, playing a musical instrument, or finally winning family game night. During childhood, the neural connections in the brain are being fine-tuned. Synapses that are regularly used are strengthened, while other synapses are pruned. Synaptic pruning is the elimination of unneeded synapses in the brain, which allows for more efficient functioning. The location of the most significant changes in brain development is the prefrontal cortex, the most forward portion of the frontal lobe. Kolk and Rekic, 2022. This area is responsible for tasks such as logic, planning, memory, and attention. As you have learned, various environmental experiences play a role in shaping brain development. The human brain consists of left and right hemispheres, joined by a bundle of nerve fibers, called the corpus callosum, which continues to mature during middle childhood. During childhood, children are increasingly able to coordinate functioning across the two hemispheres of their brain, a process called lateralization. This process is important for the development of skills that are lateralized, such as language. As the brains of children develop, their left hemisphere, which is responsible for language production and comprehension, and their right hemisphere, which is responsible for intonation and understanding emotional nuances in language, begin to work together more effectively. This integration can be observed when children start to use more advanced language structures, such as longer sentences and more sophisticated vocabulary. Moreover, children become more capable of expressing and comprehending nuanced emotions through language, indicating a greater coordination between linguistic and emotional processing across both hemispheres. Gross and fine motor skills. Children continue to make significant gains in both their gross and fine motor skills during middle childhood. Recall that gross motor skills use the larger muscles and consist of large bodily movements. The skills that develop during this time include balance, running, jumping, climbing, throwing, and catching. Table 7.1. Children are becoming faster, more coordinated, and stronger. Advancements in these skills allow them to get involved in organized sports, ride bikes, skate, or study dance or martial arts. Figure 7.2. Fine motor skills use the smaller muscles and consist of smaller-scale bodily movements, such as those that rely on the fingers and hands. Fine motor skills are important for many daily living activities, including feeding and dressing, Vanderlinde et al., 2015, as well as for many activities used for learning in school settings. During middle childhood, children continue to refine fine motor skills, such as writing, cutting, drawing, painting, tying shoelaces, and buttoning. Table 7.1. They can use all eating utensils and are able to gradually draw more detailed shapes or pictures. Handwriting improves dramatically as children become more proficient at writing smaller and neater letters. Fine motor skills also allow children to learn to play a musical instrument, such as the piano or guitar. The development of fine motor skills is also important for other aspects of development. For example, children who have well-developed fine motor skills have more advanced mathematical and reading achievement. Cameron et al., 2012. The development of fine motor skills is impacted by the experiences that children have. Figure 7.3. For example, some studies have shown increased fine motor dexterity among children who play video games. Adams et al., 2012. Culture is also an important factor that influences the development of motor skills. For example, children from Hong Kong, who often have early exposure to and practice with writing utensils and chopsticks, have more advanced fine motor skills than children from the United States. Chui et al., 2007. Differences by culture or gender are often due to differences in children practices and in the timing and amount of exposure to certain skills that children receive. Health needs in middle childhood. Children also have important health needs during middle childhood that are required to support their ability to develop in other areas, including cognition and socio-emotional development. Sufficient sleep, adequate nutrition, and regular exercise are all important. Additionally, regular health and dental care and attention to accident prevention and other health issues help to promote healthy development during this period. Sleep patterns play an important role in development during childhood. According to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, children from 6 to 12 years of age should get 9 to 12 hours of sleep every night. Peruthi et al., 2016. Figure 7.4. One reason is that during sleep, the brain consolidates the information the child was exposed to during the day. Paller et al., 2021. In addition, it is during sleep that the release of human growth hormone occurs. Zaffanello et al., 2024. Human growth hormone is responsible for physical growth and muscle development. Lack of sleep can also affect children's ability to focus and is associated with crankiness, behavior problems, and difficulties in school. Liu et al., 2024. Occasional disruptions in sleep are normal and may be the result of stressful situations at school or at home. Fortunately, such temporary sleep problems usually resolve on their own and do not create any long-term issues. However, if problems with sleep become more persistent, children have an increased risk of both emotional and behavioral difficulties, as well as ongoing problems with school performance. Williamson et al., 2020. Therefore, if a child is experiencing ongoing sleep problems that get worse over time, like night terrors, a physician should be consulted. Healthy sleep habits and routines continue to be beneficial throughout childhood. For example, quiet reading time and avoiding electronics before bed helps encourage adequate, good quality sleep. Nutrition. A healthful diet during middle childhood is important for physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development. Children need between 1,800 to 2,200 calories a day, Faison and Rooster, 2023, which should be comprised of a range of minimally processed foods, including a variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and protein, as well as small amounts of healthful oils to grow and develop well. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 2015. However, processed foods with too much sugar, fat, and sodium are common because they are less expensive, more accessible, and easier to prepare. Figure 7.5. As a result, many children have a diet full of sugary products, high-fat fast foods, and high levels of sodium, with both short and long-term consequences. In the short term, poor nutrition is related to excess weight gain and constipation. Over the long term, possible consequences include obesity and the risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, and other health and emotional problems. Saavedra and Prentice, 2023. Obesity is a serious health concern. Nearly 19% of U.S. school-aged children have obesity, a percentage that has nearly doubled over the last several decades. Hills et al., 2018. Another 16% of children are overweight, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Stearman et al., 2021, as measured by Body Mass Index, BMI. Children with a BMI in the 95th percentile or higher are considered obese. Children with a BMI between the 85th and 95th percentile for age are classified as being overweight. Obesity in children is associated with numerous health concerns, including high blood pressure and reductions in insulin, which has implications for depression and diabetes, as well as for other difficulties, such as in mental health and academic achievement. Sahu et al. 2015. Excess weight has also been shown to impair brain functioning, which in turn can harm memory and decision-making abilities. Liang et al. 2014. Another possible consequence of poor nutrition is undernutrition, which occurs when children are not capable of absorbing adequate nutrients from their diet due to digestive medical issues or because they do not receive adequate nutrients. Wasting and stunting are two extreme forms of undernutrition that, while often a concern primarily in early childhood, may continue to occur during middle childhood, particularly in cases involving food insecurity, poverty, or chronic illness. Wasting is the tendency for children to be too thin for their height, while stunting occurs when they are too short for their age. These two forms of malnutrition are closely related and are often found in the same population of children. Thurstons et al. 2022. Undernutrition can increase risks of illness, poorer cognitive functioning, and poor mental and behavioral health. Kyrillos et al. 2022. Given that poor nutrition during childhood is linked to so many poor developmental outcomes, nutritional interventions that increase the overall quality of nutrition for children have been shown to increase academic performance and cognitive development. O'Brien et al. 2021. These interventions include programs to provide higher quality school lunches, as well as social programs to provide access to high-quality food for lower-income families. Children have a high likelihood of being resilient from early nutrition risks when prevention and intervention programs are made available in early and middle childhood. Suryawan et al. 2022. There are social programs that educate parents, provide free lunches, and provide access to affordable, healthful food. Exercise. Physical activity and engagement in sports during middle childhood have a positive impact on the motor, cardiovascular, hormonal, respiratory, immunologic, and nervous systems of school-aged children, and are associated with better cognitive and emotional development. Bidzon, Bluma, and Lipowski, 2018. As a result, the CDC recommends that school-aged children get at least 1 hour of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day. This physical activity can occur in school during physical education classes or recess, during unstructured play outside of school, or through involvement in organized sports teams. Despite the benefits, children are more sedentary now than they have been in past decades, and only about a third regularly engage in physical activity. Graph, 2016. This inactivity is a global issue. According to the World Health Organization, 85% of children across the world are considered inactive, although rates do vary slightly by country. Guthold et al. 2020. For example, one study reported that only 26.2% of children in Thailand met the guidelines for adequate physical activity. Keitawongsa et al. 2021. While 33% of children in Canada, Barnes et al. 2018, and 60% of children in Shanghai, China, Shang et al. 2020, met the guidelines for physical activity before the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the rates dropped to approximately 18% for both countries during the pandemic. Recent research has highlighted barriers that make it difficult for children to get the recommended amount of daily exercise. For example, children who live in areas with high levels of poverty are less likely to have access to high-quality recreational facilities and safe places to play. Kim and Cubbin, 2020. This can result in decreased physical activity levels among children. In some countries in the Middle East and Northern Africa, barriers to physical activity include the absence of social support from parents and friends, lack of appropriate facilities, and hot climate. Chabane et al. 2021.1. In many countries around the world, girls also have additional barriers to participating in physical activity related to cultural roles for females that includes greater encouragement for boys to engage in sporting activities. Kretschmer et al. 2023. Promoting physical activity and health for the entire family through school-based interventions shows promising evidence of reducing sedentary behavior and improving healthy behaviors. Santos et al. 2023. Accident prevention. As discussed in 5.1 Physical Health and Growth in Early Childhood, unintentional injuries are a leading cause of both death and disabilities among children. West et al. 2021. This continues to be true in middle childhood. The leading causes of non-fatal child injuries in the United States are automobile accidents, drowning, poisoning, fires, and suffocation. Globally, Road traffic injuries, drownings, fire, and poisoning are the most common causes of unintentional injuries among children. Chandran, et al., 2010. Injuries in children are often preventable. In fact, prevention strategies have successfully reduced injury-related deaths in higher-income countries, such as the United States. CDC 2019. Some of the more effective prevention strategies include the required use of seatbelts, laws regarding distracted driving, the use of bicycle helmets, and the use of crossing guards near schools to reduce deaths and injuries related to automobile accidents. To reduce drownings, caregivers are encouraged to give children swimming lessons, to use life jackets, and to closely supervise children near water. The use of safety caps on medicine bottles and the practice of keeping medications out of the sight and reach of children are helpful strategies for reducing accidental poisonings and overdoses. Although these prevention strategies have been effective in higher-income countries, unintentional injuries continue to disproportionately harm children in low- and middle-income countries. Tupitz et al., 2020. Although unintentional injuries have been decreasing in recent years, firearm deaths have been steadily increasing. A 40.5% increase occurred from 2018 to 2021. Goldstick et al., 2022. In 2020, the leading cause of death among children in the United States was due to firearms. Goldstick et al., 2022. Passing motor vehicle accidents for the first time. Fortunately, most unintentional injuries and deaths are preventable, and in fact, ongoing and systematic prevention efforts that focus on modifying behaviors and environmental factors can effectively reduce the rates of unintentional injuries. Julian, 2021. However, interventions need to attend to changing policies and trends in health risks. For example, the state of Georgia saw an increase in pediatric firearm injuries following state law changes that reduced restrictions on carrying firearms, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, indicating a greater need for effective prevention strategies, such as providing greater education on violence prevention and safe storage of firearms. Mulugeta et al., 2024, Lee et al., 2022. Health and dental care. Most children between the ages of 6 and 11 in the United States are reported to be in either excellent or very good physical health. Parasuraman et al., 2020. Middle childhood is also the ideal time for children to develop healthy habits that can persist into adulthood as they begin to develop independence and self-care. As a result, it is important for children to continue to receive regular health care. In fact, primary health care is both effective and cost-effective for enhancing both physical and mental health. Craif et al., 2020. Unfortunately, almost 4.5 million U.S. children do not have health insurance. They are less likely to receive needed health care and, as a result, may have poorer overall health. AAP 2020. While global mortality rates among children over the age of 5 have dropped by more than 50%, UNICEF 2019, children across the world continue to have unmet health needs due to limited access to health care. Chang and Shelkovsky 2019. Dental care is also very important in this stage of life. Beginning around age 6, children begin to lose their deciduous teeth, often referred to as baby teeth. Figure 7.6. The first tooth lost is usually in the center of the mouth, which is why you may be able to picture 6 or 7-year-old children with a gap in their smile. While they are losing their deciduous teeth, a process that continues until about age 12, children are simultaneously gaining permanent teeth. Severe tooth decay can harm a child's development, including socio-emotional development, Ramos Jorge et al., 2014, and increased school absenteeism, Kristapong et al., 2013. For example, studies with children in several low to middle-income countries, such as Thailand, have found that tooth decay has a negative impact on children's social interactions as well as their self-esteem. Children in middle childhood are at risk of developing tooth decay and cavities due to factors such as poor oral hygiene, sugary diets, and irregular dental visits. Good oral care, including regular visits to the dentist and daily brushing and flossing, is important to maintain healthy teeth and to avoid tooth decay. Other health issues. Although middle childhood is generally a healthy period for many children, there are some common health issues that are often seen during middle childhood, such as asthma and diabetes. Asthma is a lifelong chronic lung disease that causes inflammation in the airways, making it difficult to breathe. Asthma is a serious public health problem globally, WHO 2024. It affects about 8% of children in the United States. Federal Interagency Forum on Child and Family Statistics 2017. Although there is no known single cause of asthma, a child is more likely to have asthma if other family members have asthma, if they have other allergic conditions, if they live in urban areas or areas with high air pollution, and if they have obesity. WHO 2024. Avoiding common triggers of asthma, including air pollution and allergies, can reduce the symptoms of asthma, such as shortness of breath and tightness in the chest. McCarthy 2022. Although it can typically be medically managed, uncontrolled asthma is one of the leading causes of school absences among children and can also interfere with sleep and physical activity. Kien et al. 2022. Diabetes, a metabolic disorder, is another chronic health issue that can have significant effects on child development. Until recently, most cases in children were type 1 diabetes, a disease in which the immune system attacks healthy tissue and results in the body not producing enough insulin to get glucose or sugar into the cells. However, type 2 diabetes, which used to be considered adult-onset diabetes, is increasing among children and is often preventable. Risk factors for type 2 diabetes include excess weight, inactivity, and having a family history, which leads to increased insulin resistance. CDC 2022. Although both types of diabetes can be managed, diabetes and other chronic illnesses in childhood have been linked to increased behavior problems and socio-emotional concerns in children. Lupini et al. 2023. Many of the behavioral and socio-emotional risks for children with chronic illnesses such as diabetes may be prevented through careful monitoring and treatment of symptoms. Many of the health issues that children may face in middle childhood are experienced at a higher rate for children from a lower SES and for children from historically marginalized races or ethnicities. For example, childhood obesity, diabetes, and poor nutrition are more common risks for those in lower-income countries and minority racial/ethnic groups in wealthier countries. Al-Khatib and Obita 2024. Often these trends are related to complex socioeconomic risk factors that may occur at a higher rate, particularly in families, neighborhoods, and regions facing socioeconomic inequality. For instance, families with a lower SES often have less access to more healthful foods, such as fresh produce, and easier access to less healthy fast food. Chatham and Mixer 2019. In addition, healthier foods such as fresh fruit and vegetables often cost more than less healthy food options. Chatham and Mixer 2019. Further, income and education have been found to be associated with quality of diet and levels of physical activity, both of which are closely associated with being overweight or obese. Reyes et al. 2020. Prevention and intervention efforts that focus on promoting a healthy lifestyle in combination with programs that support those most at risk of poor nutrition are effective strategies to promote public health. Obita and Al-Khatib 2023. There are also socioeconomic disparities in risks of accidents, injuries, and asthma. For example, in the United States, firearm injuries and deaths are a higher risk in states with higher poverty and disproportionately impact Black children. Roberts et al. 2023. As mentioned earlier, prevention strategies and community policies show promise in reducing these risks. Finally, risks of childhood asthma affect some racial and ethnic populations more than others, with non-Latinx Black children having the higher rates, 10.6%, followed by non-Latinx white, 7.7%, Asians, 3.8%, and Latinx children, 6.6%. These disparities are likely influenced by SES, environmental exposures to pollutants, exposure to long-term stress, and access to quality healthcare. Grant et al. 2022. Point 2. Healthcare providers can use this information to screen children living in neighborhoods that face higher risks, such as those experiencing greater exposure to air pollution. Local governments and community organizations can also work to improve neighborhood conditions in these areas. Aris et al. 2023. Ayana is a new second-grade teacher and is thinking about her lesson plans. She has a 7-year-old student, Sarah, who struggles with attention and focus in the classroom. Sarah often gets distracted during lessons and has difficulty staying on task. Nonetheless, Sarah seems to thrive during classroom learning games and artistic activities. Ayana also teaches James, who has been diagnosed with dyslexia. He struggles with reading and writing tasks. He reverses letters and has trouble with phonemic awareness. James's cognitive challenges impact his confidence and self-esteem, as he feels discouraged by his struggles in comparison to his peers. However, James loves the hands-on science experiments in class and is always eager to help his classmates. Ayana knows that all her students are making incredible gains in their abilities to think logically and process information. She can ask children to solve problems that include concrete information. She has also started to teach them basic strategies for memorizing information, but may need to use a variety of teaching strategies to meet the individualized needs of her students. Children's abilities to think logically and process information changes throughout middle childhood as they pass through various stages of cognitive development. Cognitive milestones. During middle childhood, children make impressive gains in cognitive development. Their ability to think logically and flexibly and remember information increases dramatically. Although their thinking, problem-solving, and language use is becoming more sophisticated, they're not yet adult-like in their cognitive abilities. Table 7.2 shows some of the major cognitive achievements children will likely make by the end of middle childhood. Some of these milestones develop earlier in middle childhood, such as the ability to tell time, while other milestones develop later in middle childhood, such as the ability to understand and use fractions. Other important milestones are abilities that further develop across early and middle childhood, such as the ability to think symbolically or to recognize and understand the perspectives of others. Child development is a dynamic process, influenced by the interactions children have with the world around them. So a range of ages rather than a single point in time is typically considered normal for the development of various skills. The culture in which children develop and the way caregivers share information with children varies dramatically and influences children's learning and skill development. For example, in the United States, parents use active teaching strategies such as praise to guide children, while parents in Vanuatu, a small island country in the southern Pacific Ocean, are more likely to collaborate with children as a form of teaching. Clegg et al. 2021. Language is another important aspect of cognitive development that is impacted by culture. For example, beginning in infancy, German mothers focus on the individual needs or desires of their child, which highlights their view of the child as a unique individual. Mothers of the Cameroonian Inso focus more on the social environment they and their child are in. Veerhouse et al. 2011. This means that children are likely to show individual and cultural differences in the timing of reaching cognitive milestones. Families and peers are also important influences for cognitive development during middle childhood. For example, parents play an important role in providing a stimulating environment for their children by interacting with them verbally and providing structured activities that allows them to explore their world. Relatively new research has also shown that fathers, as well as mothers, play an important role in the cognitive development of their children by engaging with them through reading, the use of language during interactions, and responsive parenting, Varghese and Watch in 2016. Whereas mothers tend to use words that are familiar to children, fathers tend to use a larger variety of words, which is helpful for developing the vocabulary of their children. Vernon Fegans et al. 2010. Fathers also tend to use more affirmations and action directives than mothers. Tamas Lamanda et al. 2012. Of course, as discussed in other chapters, there are many individual differences in families, caregivers, and the roles caregivers may play in fostering healthy cognitive development. As you will learn in 8.3 Social Contexts, Peers, Family, and Media in Middle Childhood, children begin to spend more time with their peers, and their friendships become an increasingly important influence on cognitive development. Figure 7.7. Children learn new knowledge and skills from each other through interactions and play. They also develop new interests by observing the interests of their peers. In fact, children may learn a great deal from peers, and peer relationships play an important role in learning and cognitive development. Lorson and Veenstra, 2022, Lees et al., 2019. For example, working with peers can enhance problem-solving and creative thinking. Liu Levy et al., 2023. This peer learning is consistent across cultures, even in cultures that emphasize the importance of adult-child transmission of learning. Liu Levy et al., 2023. Concrete operations in the stage theory of cognitive development. As you've learned, cognitive developmental theories focus on the way thought processes change with age, and how these changes in children's thinking influence the way they understand the world and interact with it. Recall that theorist Jean Piaget proposed a cognitive developmental theory describing stages that reflect qualitatively different ways of thinking. Subsequent cross-cultural research studying areas including Bali, Indonesia, India, and Nepal found that the sequence of stages is generally the same across cultures, and the cognitive processes within those stages are the same. Dawson, 2022. Piaget's concrete operational stage begins around age 7 and continues until approximately age 11, although cross-cultural research has found a fair amount of variation in the age at which children reach its various substages. Dawson, 2022. During this stage, children become capable of using logic to solve concrete problems they can directly experience, and that involve tangible objects. For example, when comparing the sizes of objects, children will place them side by side to measure the size before lining them up by size. However, they are not yet able to apply logic to abstract or hypothetical situations, such as imagining the consequences of a world made from candy. Concrete operational thought. In the stage of concrete operational thinking, children begin to understand basic logical principles and concepts, such as cause and effect relationships, size and distance. Piaget, 1971. They are now capable of operations, cognitive actions that use logic and are reversible, and can accurately imagine the consequences of various actions they observe or experience. One such operation is conservation, the property by which the amount of something does not change even if the appearance of that thing changes. In Piaget's famous, most well-known example of conservation, a researcher poured liquid from one container into another of a different shape. 5.3 Cognition in early childhood. Although we understand that the amount of liquid does not change, children who do not yet understand operations believe taller but thinner containers have more liquid than shorter, wider ones. Children in the concrete operational stage, however, understand that the amount of liquid remains the same, indicating they understand conservation of volume. Children also demonstrate their understanding of conservation with quantities when they recognize that the number of candies does not change whether you spread them out or put them in a pile. They also know that stretching a ball of clay into the shape of a snake does not change the amount of clay. Although an understanding of conservation occurs at similar ages in most countries, the exact age at which children develop it and the type of conservation they first understand does differ across some cultures. Goldschmidt et al., 1973. For example, they may learn conservation of shape before conservation of volume based on their experience with the objects around them. One reason children in this age group come to understand conservation is that they can now focus on more than one aspect of the task, a skill referred to as decentration. In other words, in a conservation of volume task, children at this age can focus on both the height and width of the containers that hold liquid, and may make comments like, "The taller glass has the same amount of water as the shorter glass because it's skinnier." When a child is unable to decenter, they will often indicate that the taller glass has more liquid, because they are only focusing on height and ignoring the width of the glass. They also demonstrate an awareness of reversibility, which is closely related to their understanding of conservation. Reversibility is the process by which we can reverse a sequence of events, returning to the starting point. For example, children who understand reversibility are aware that liquid poured from a shorter, wider container into a taller, thinner one can be poured back, and the amount will not have changed. Children are also able to accurately complete Piaget's class inclusion problem between the ages of 7 and 10, meaning that they now understand classification groupings and hierarchies, another type of operation. The ability to grasp hierarchical classification allows them to sort objects into both general and more specific groups. For example, children at this age who are shown 4 apples and 3 bananas can correctly tell you that there are more apples than bananas and that there are more total fruits, 7 if you combine the 4 apples and 3 bananas, than apples 4. This shows they can simultaneously focus on a larger class, fruit, as well as 2 subclasses, apples and bananas. During the concrete operational stage, children also develop the ability to sort objects along multiple dimensions. For example, a child can sort their stuffed animals both by size and by color. This operation involves organizing things in a series, known as seriation. One task Piaget used to test seriation required children to take sticks of different lengths and arrange them from shortest to longest. Figure 7.8, Inhelder and Piaget, 1958. Children can do this quickly and efficiently by the beginning of the concrete operational stage. Children can also demonstrate transitive inference during seriation tasks. This is the ability to use existing knowledge to find missing information. For example, if you ask an 8-year-old, if Andrew is taller than Brianna, and Brianna is taller than Cleo, who's the shortest? They can correctly infer that Cleo is the shortest. Recall that one of the characteristics of the pre-operational stage of cognitive development, which includes children from the ages of 3 through 7, is egocentrism, which means young children struggle to differentiate their thoughts and feelings from those of others. However, during the concrete operational stage, children begin to consider how others might think and feel. In other words, they become less egocentric. In the classic Three Mountains task by Piaget, discussed in 5.3 Cognition in Early Childhood, children in the concrete operational stage can describe what the mountain scene would look like from the perspective of a child sitting on the other side of the table. Evaluation and impact of the concrete operational stage. Was Piaget's description of the concrete operational stage and skills that children demonstrate in this stage and age range accurate and informative? In many ways, Piaget's description of the concrete operational stage has held up well to scrutiny. However, as discussed earlier, there are differences in how children demonstrate concrete operational skills across the world. Other research has shown that cognitive development may not be as stage-like as the theory suggests. For example, some children show aspects of concrete operational thought before the age of 7, which is earlier than Piaget believed it first appeared. McGarrigle and Donaldson, 1974. Children can achieve earlier understanding of some operations, such as conservation, when they are specifically exposed to tasks in which adults demonstrate them. Dawson, 2022. On the other hand, another study found that many children may reach Piaget's stages later than they did 30 years ago. Flynn and Shayer, 2018. Which may be due to drops in education budgets and in the overall quality of education in many countries. Despite these criticisms, Piaget's theory offers a window into the many cognitive advancements that happen during middle childhood. Piaget's approach to cognitive development among school-aged children has had a tremendous impact on education. Zhang, 2022. Many schools use his principles to determine how to educate children and when to introduce concepts such as addition and subtraction. Many schools also provide students with opportunities to learn through active learning, such as building a volcano in science class, rather than just reading about volcanoes. However, despite this understanding of the importance of active learning for children, we are seeing increases in the amount of time that children engage with screens, even in school settings. Mupala et al., 2023. Screen media use is associated with poorer academic performance, along with other potential adverse effects on development. It depends. Are there cognitive benefits to screen media usage? Mobile devices and interactive media have become a part of the everyday lives of children. In fact, we now consider children digital natives because they have always been surrounded by mobile and other interactive devices. As a result, parents and professionals who work with children have wondered whether there are any developmental benefits to screen media use by children. Researchers have been exploring this very issue. Frequent screen use, often defined as more than 2 hours a day, has been found to have several negative outcomes. Liu et al., 2021. Excessive screen use has been associated with physical, behavioral, and academic problems. Mupala et al., 2023. Robinson et al., 2017. For example, higher use of screens has been associated with lower cognitive functioning and lower psychological health. Liu et al., 2021. Given these results, what positive outcomes can children experience from screen use? The answer is that it depends in part on how screens are being used. Not surprisingly, the content matters. Potential positive benefits of screen use include opportunities for increased communication and greater access to information and educational opportunities, especially when parents or schools use technology as a learning tool. Panjeti Madan and Ranganathan, 2023. For example, children can use online encyclopedias and dictionaries to find answers to questions and can maintain social connections with friends who may live far away. Studies have also shown that when screen media is designed to enhance reading and other cognitive skills, it can improve performance. Mupala et al., 2023. What does all this tell us about the impact of screen use and interactive media on children? Professionals and caregivers must acknowledge the possible disadvantages of excessive screen use. The American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP, 2021, no longer has strict recommended limits for screen time. Rather, they recommend that parents make an informed decision about how children should use media outside of a school setting, keeping in mind that children need adequate sleep and physical activity. They also advise that media consist of high-quality programming with an educational focus. Parents can manage screen time by setting limits, monitoring content, and encouraging children to use more educational media tools. Finally, caregivers should add alternate activities that allow children to improve their physical, cognitive, linguistic, and socio-emotional development in other ways. Information processing perspective. Recall that information processing theory, 1.3 Major Theories and Theorists, compares the way people think to how computers process, store, and retrieve information. Information processing theory informs our understanding of memory, attention, and executive functions, such as the ability to plan how to approach large projects or organize time. All these aspects of cognition are developing rapidly during middle childhood and become increasingly relevant as children begin formal schooling. Unlike Piaget's theory of cognitive development, which focuses on the qualitative differences in development that occur as children grow older, information processing theory describes quantitative changes in cognition. In other words, information processing theory describes how children become faster and more efficient in their reasoning and use of memory. It posits that cognitive development is continuous, rather than consisting of discrete stages. Also, unlike Piaget's theory, information processing theory is not the work of one theorist. Instead, it is based on the research and ideas of multiple researchers who shared an interest in understanding how humans develop reasoning and processing skills. As you might expect, school-age children can process information more accurately and rapidly and are more efficient at retaining that information than they were during early childhood. They also show significant gains in their ability to determine what information to attend to, their ability to attend to information for longer periods, their grasp of how their memory works, their use of strategies to improve retention and recall. Here you'll consider the development of other cognitive abilities, including attention, memory, metacognition, and executive functions in more detail. You will also consider how theory of mind changes in middle childhood. Attention. Selective attention is the ability to stay focused on one thing while ignoring distracting information that is not relevant to the task at hand. Although this skill shows steady improvement throughout childhood and into adolescence, many individual differences among children exist. Considerable research has shown that the child's temperament is associated with selective attention. Rothbart and Prueta, 2005. For example, children with better self-regulation skills perform better on tasks involving selective attention. Rueda et al., 2005. Sustained attention is the ability to attend to a single task for extended periods of time, Figure 7.9, while the ability to shift from one task or stimulus to another is called divided attention. Although these skills are also improving throughout childhood and into adolescence, Carlson et al., 2013, children have a limited capacity for attention, influenced by many factors, including anxiety, the task's level of difficulty, and their existing skills. Sternberg and Sternberg, 2011. For example, you may remember being distracted at school and gazing out the window at other children on the playground when you were supposed to be focusing on your schoolwork. Memory. Related to improvements in attention are the gains in children's working memory and their use of encoding strategies to improve memory. Recall from 3.4 Cognition and Memory in Infants and Toddlers that short-term memory allows us to store information in our mind for a short time, and long-term memory is a more permanent storage of information. Working memory combines aspects of attentional control with short-term memory storage and involves an active manipulation of information. During middle childhood, working memory improves. For example, if you recite a list of 10 items such as fork, frog, horse, plate, cup, dog, cat, spoon, knife, bowl to a child, they can repeat it back to you by organizing the information into categories, dishes, and animals. The process of transferring information from short-term/working memory to long-term memory is called encoding. Middle childhood is the time when children begin using more effective encoding strategies to improve their ability to move information from short-term/working memory to long-term memory. Bjorklund et al., 2008. Encoding strategies include rehearsing items, grouping items into categories, and spending more time studying harder items rather than easy ones. Children can start using these strategies around 5 to 6 years of age, but they are able to use them more efficiently around age 7, after which this ability continues to increase through age 10. Schneider et al., 2009. Children continue to use more complex encoding strategies as they move through middle childhood. Some of the more frequently used memory strategies are rehearsal, elaboration, and organization. Descriptions and examples of each of these are provided in Table 7.3. Metacognition. Another reason children develop more sophisticated cognitive skills during middle childhood is that they are also developing metacognition, or knowledge about how we think and learn, and how we use that awareness to become better thinkers and learners. For example, children begin to understand that they may need to reread a paragraph if they didn't understand it after the first reading. As they move into middle childhood, children show a grasp of metamemory, an understanding of how memory works. Kvavulashvili and Ford, 2022. For example, they recognize that it is easier to remember short lists than long lists, and that they have involuntary memories they can retrieve with no deliberate effort. Younger children tend to think they are better at a task than they are, and that they have better memories than they possess. But the ability to accurately evaluate their cognitive skill continues to improve into adolescence. Then again, adults often struggle with these same issues. Executive functions. Executive functions are the cognitive skills we need to control or self-regulate our behavior and to work toward goals. They include skills such as working memory and attentional control, and others such as inhibition, problem-solving, self-control, mental flexibility, and planning and organization. Executive functions begin to develop during the preschool years, but continue to mature through middle childhood and into adolescence. In fact, middle childhood is an important period for the development of executive functions because of the increasing social and academic demands associated with formal schooling. These skills are closely tied to maturation of the prefrontal cortex in the brain that is taking place during the pre-adolescent years, and they are also influenced by the presence of warm and responsive parents and by cognitively stimulating environments. Bourrier et al. 2018, Fay-Stambach et al. 2014. Executive functions are also associated with school readiness, academic achievement, and social behavior. Poon 2018. Thus, schools or intervention programs that target executive functions may see significant rewards as children use those skills to be successful in academic and social settings. Theory of mind. Another cognitive ability related to frontal lobe functioning and executive functions is theory of mind. The awareness of your own mental states and the understanding that others have thoughts, beliefs, and perspectives different from your own. Figure 7.10. As discussed in 5.3 Cognition in Early Childhood, theory of mind typically emerges between the ages of 4 and 5. However, it continues to develop for the next several years. Children are increasingly able to predict what others are thinking and feeling and develop an understanding of complex mental abilities from various perspectives. Theory of mind has been linked to better academic achievement. There are several explanations for this. Leachy and Devine, 2022. First, theory of mind is likely associated with better relationships with peers and teachers, which may increase school engagement. Second, children who understand their own mind as well as the minds of others have higher levels of reading comprehension because they understand the message that the author is intending to convey and the minds of the characters in the texts that they read. Kim, 2017. Similarly, theory of mind is associated with scientific reasoning. Children who understand the minds of others are better able to create and evaluate hypotheses. Kyriakopoulou and Vosniadou, 2020. There are individual differences in the development of theory of mind. For example, children diagnosed with some developmental disabilities, including autism spectrum disorder and social anxiety disorder, often have deficits in theory of mind. Speck et al. 2010, Washburn et al. 2016. Understanding these differences can provide therapists, teachers, and parents with information to help understand the thoughts and behaviors of children with these disorders, and can aid in planning teaching strategies to explicitly teach perspective taking. Cultural differences also exist. Children in collectivist cultures like China and India tend to recognize later than children in individualistic cultures like the United States and Australia that others have different beliefs and opinions. Shahayan et al., 2011. A recent systematic review of studies on cultural variations in theory of mind and related constructs such as empathy and perspective taking indicated that cross-cultural differences in language use, cultural values, and parenting styles may lead to differences in development of these skills. Aval-Nave et al., 2019. A likely reason is that individualistic cultures emphasize recognizing differences in opinions, thoughts, and beliefs more than collectivist cultures do. Malik has been thinking about the range of strengths he sees in his 4th grade students. While some clearly excel at reading or math, others struggle with schoolwork but are very artistic. A few are athletic or love music. He wants to find ways to help his students discover and develop their strengths, because he understands that they will thrive when they feel competent. He knows that self-efficacy is important for optimal development. At the broadest level, intelligence describes an individual's ability to adapt to the world around them. Sternberg, 2014. It includes several skills, including creativity, problem-solving, abstract reasoning, and the ability to learn. You will learn about several theoretical approaches that consider how to define and measure intelligence, as well as whether intelligence is a single ability or consists of multiple different abilities. But you'll begin by considering both genetic and environmental contributions. Genetic and environmental influences. Intelligence varies quite a bit across children and is influenced by both genetic and environmental factors. Studies of genetic influence on intelligence have often looked at adopted children and twins to examine similarities and differences in intelligence. Some researchers have explored whether specific areas of the genome, the individual's complete set of genetic material, are associated with measures of intelligence. Bartels et al. 2022, Deary et al. 2022. Although this work has shown that there is a genetic influence on intelligence, it has not identified specific genes. In fact, intelligence is likely influenced by the combination of many genes. Sneakers et al. 2017. Environmental factors also influence the development of intelligence in children. For example, prenatal and postnatal exposure to radiation or lead can negatively affect intelligence. McFarland et al. 2022. Access to healthy developmental resources is positively related to intelligence. For example, children who eat a daily breakfast score higher on intelligence tests than children who do not. Roberts et al. 2022. Experiences that stimulate the child's brain, such as extracurricular activities, high-quality toys and books, and events such as travel, can have a positive impact on intelligence. Dunkel et al. 2023, Figure 7.11. Children from a lower SES tend to perform less well on intelligence tests than children from higher SES backgrounds. Von Stum and Plomin, 2015. These differences are likely due to the greater access to learning experiences and resources, often available to families with a higher SES. Regardless of SES, parent characteristics such as their educational beliefs or having a growth mindset, the belief that abilities can improve through work and effort, have also been associated with higher child intelligence. Elansary et al. 2021. For example, when parents believe that the abilities of their children can change, children are more persistent and have better reading skills. Song et al. 2022. The number of contributing factors shows just how complicated it is to study and understand the way intelligence develops during childhood. You'll consider various theories and factors in this section. Theories of intelligence. Several theories of intelligence have been developed over the years. Some suggest that intelligence is a general ability, whereas others argue that many specific skills can be considered components of it. General intelligence. Around the turn of the 20th century, French psychologist Alfred Binet, along with his colleague Theodore Simon, developed a test that the French government used to identify children who needed academic support. This intelligence test included a variety of tasks, such as defining words, naming objects, constructing and completing sentences, and comparing items. Although the questions were quite different from one another, children who did well on one typically got others correct as well. English psychologist Charles Spearman used those results to suggest that this strong, positive correlation was due to a general cognitive factor that underlies multiple cognitive skills, which he called the general intelligence factor. For example, when a child is considered intelligent, many people generalize this judgment to all cognitive abilities and expect a child to excel in all their academic classes. Although many psychologists generally agree that the G factor does exist, there is also support for the presence of more specific skills, which Spearman referred to as specific intelligences. One of Spearman's biggest critics was Raymond Cattell, a student of his who argued that general intelligence is composed of fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. The ability to use logic and solve problems in new ways is fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is the existing knowledge individuals have developed during their life through education and experience. Children using information they read in a book to complete homework or solve equations on a test are using crystallized intelligence, whereas figuring out a new way to get home from a friend's house is demonstrating fluid intelligence. Figure 7.12. Multiple intelligences. In response to Spearman's concept of general intelligence, other psychologists proposed multiple factor theories of intelligence. Thurstone, 1946. Gardner and Hatch, 1989. Howard Gardner proposed multiple intelligences that compose to a person's particular abilities. Gardner and Moran, 2006. Gardner's theory proposes 8 distinct types of intelligence that may better inform a student's unique learning than a focus on a singular intelligence. Gardner and Moran, 2006, Table 7.4. Essentially, Gardner believed individuals could excel in one or more of these areas, but not necessarily all. For example, the star basketball player in school may have excellent kinesthetic intelligence, whereas the soloist in the school orchestra demonstrates outstanding musical intelligence. Gardner also argued that traditional tests of intelligence measure only linguistic, logical, mathematical, and spatial ability, and that the other 5 types of intelligence are less valued in school settings, although they can be valuable for career and personal development. Recent research in neuroscience supports the theory that unique neural patterns exist for each of the 8 intelligences Gardner proposed. Shearer, 2018. Although children clearly can demonstrate a specific strength in one or more areas, some critics have suggested that Gardner's intelligences are better described as talents rather than separate types of intelligence. Visser et al., 2006. In addition, because there is substantial overlap between some areas such as mathematical and spatial intelligences, it may be misleading to consider them separate forms of intelligence. Visser et al., 2006. Another criticism regarding Gardner's theory is that the association of multiple intelligences with differences in brain function is a myth that has not been substantiated by research. Waterhouse, 2023. However, some research has indicated that specific neurological processes are associated with each type of intelligence. Shearer and Karanian, 2017. Despite these criticisms, educators find Gardner's theory to be a useful framework for viewing individual differences in student abilities. Soon after Gardner proposed his theory, U.S. psychologist Robert Sternberg advocated for a triarchic theory of intelligence, Sternberg, 1984, that consisted of 3 parts, Figure 7.13. Analytical skills, the ability to conduct academic problem solving. A child with strong analytical skills may be particularly adept at identifying the protagonist and theme in a book they are reading, or be able to evaluate and compare different theoretical perspectives in a science class. Creative skills, the ability to come up with novel ideas or solve problems in novel ways. A child with creative abilities may be able to build a structure in the woods using only items found in nature or creating a unique piece of art. Practical skills, the ability to adapt to different contexts and apply learning to daily life experiences. Practical intelligence has also been referred to as street smarts. A child that has practical intelligence understands that if they see smoke coming from underneath a door, they should call 911, rather than open the door to investigate the source of the smoke. They also use their prior life experience to make good decisions in new experiences. Analytical intelligence is assessed by traditional intelligence tests. However, these tests do not measure creative and practical intelligence. Research showing that analytical intelligence is not associated with creativity supports the idea that these are distinct forms of intelligence. Furnham and Bakhtiar, 2008. Both Gardner and Sternberg expanded the definition of intelligence to include additional skills they believed were important predictors of career and personal success. However, Sternberg focused primarily on cognitive skills that traditional testing methods often fail to assess, whereas Gardner's theory is designed to identify intellectual strengths that exist outside of typical school curricula. The concept of multiple intelligence has made a notable impact on educators, who have used these ideas to support students' learning needs. Many teachers recognize that their pupils demonstrate meaningful differences in cognitive abilities that may go unrecognized by traditional assessments, and that a multiple intelligences approach can help personalize education for them. Chen et al., 2009. Shearer, 2018. Because traditional assessments of intelligence may underestimate cognitive abilities, a range of assessment strategies is beneficial for identifying the unique pattern of strengths across individual children. Intelligence testing. Human intelligence has been studied for more than 100 years. One of the first people to investigate it was Sir Francis Galton in the late 1800s. Galton attempted to use reaction time and physical characteristics to measure intelligence. Although he did not find that these physical characteristics captured human intelligence, he is considered one of the pioneers in human intelligence research. Alfred Binet's intelligence test introduced the idea of standardized assessments, tests that use the same questions for all, and are administered and scored the same way every time. Later in the 20th century, U.S. psychologists Louis Terman and David Wexler used the Binet test as the basis for their updated and expanded intelligence tests. Psychologists have continued to revise and improve these tests, including researching how they are influenced by culture and environment. Modern intelligence tests. Modern intelligence tests calculate an intelligence quotient, IQ, a score intended to quantify human intelligence. The way IQ scores are calculated has changed some over time, though the average score of intelligence has stayed set at 100. Scoring generally involves comparing an individual's test score, sometimes called mental age, to the average scores of their chronological age group. The age at which a person is performing is their mental age. This is obtained from an intelligence test. For example, a 5-year-old child who has the same abilities as most other 5-year-olds would have an average IQ, an IQ of 100, while a 10-year-old child who can do what an average 12-year-old is able to do would have a higher IQ, around 120. IQ scores are calculated by measuring the deviation IQ, or the degree to which an individual deviates from what is average for that particular age. This entails finding the norms or expected scores for a specific population by having a large number of individuals of different ages complete the intelligence test. Through compiling population data, researchers can better capture the bell curve, or normal distribution, of data to understand where most people score. For each age group, the average score on the test is set to 100, with a standard deviation of 15, figure 7.14. Standard deviations describe how data points are distributed or spread out in a population. Seeing a person's score in comparison to a normal distribution can also help determine their unique learning needs and skills. For example, a score of 70 would be described as 2 standard deviations below the mean, and an individual with that score may benefit from extra support in some academic settings. Similarly, someone with a score of 130 or above, 2 standard deviations above the mean, would benefit from specific enrichments or supports in academic settings as well. Finally, scores that fall within 1 standard deviation of the mean, between 85 and 115, are considered average, with 68% of the population having IQ scores in this range. The intelligence tests most often used today are the Wechsler scales and the Stanford-Binet, which assess a variety of cognitive abilities including memory, reasoning, arithmetic, general knowledge, and vocabulary. The Wechsler scales include 3 tests based on the individual's age. Tasks might involve things like comprehension and logic questions, memory tasks, and tasks designed to measure visual and spatial skills. For example, a child might complete a block puzzle or designed to assess their visual spatial skills. A good intelligence test has both reliability, which means results are consistent over time, and validity, which means the test accurately measures what it says it is measuring. In other words, a good intelligence test should give the same score, or at least very close to it, if taken more than once, and it should measure intelligence rather than something else. However, the skills used to measure intelligence change with age. For example, questions considered difficult for a 10-year-old may not be challenging for a 30-year-old, so norms are established for tests given to different age groups. Intelligence tests are also regularly updated because levels of intelligence may change over time in a population. In fact, the Flynn effect describes the significant rise in intelligence scores observed over the past few decades. Flynn, 2012. Although the size of the increase varies from country to country, it has been about 3 points every 10 years. Piechnig and Voracek, 2015. Environmental factors such as parental education and family size seem to account for much of the Flynn effect. Bratsberg and Rogeberg, 2018. As children are exposed to new information and ideas, their thinking likely changes. Tenisienhuis, 2013. However, some evidence suggests it has reversed in several countries. Dutton et al., 2016. Uses for intelligence tests. Intelligence tests have been used to make decisions about individuals in a variety of ways. For example, the United States military has used intelligence tests that include nonverbal reasoning questions to assess differences in intelligence among adults, regardless of whether they were literate. Richelson, 2018. Intelligence tests have also been used to make decisions about whether inmates are eligible for the death penalty, for example, in Hall v. Florida, 2024, and to predict academic performance in children. Bloom et al., 2009. Children with higher IQs also tend to have higher grades in school. Lozano Bosco et al., 2022. Thus, IQ tests are sometimes used to make decisions about school and college admissions, as well as employment opportunities. Ganuthula and Sinha, 2019. Educators have also used intelligence tests as one criterion used to diagnose learning and/or intellectual disabilities, as well as to identify gifted children. For example, in addition to IQ tests, assessment of adaptive functioning, which refers to an individual's ability to complete daily living tasks, is also used to diagnose an intellectual disability. Tassé et al. 2016. Tests may also be useful in identifying areas of cognitive strength for a child, as well as cognitive skills that may require extra support in an educational setting. Cultural and environmental factors in intelligence testing. As discussed earlier, intelligence is influenced by a variety of environmental factors, including culture and SES. Intelligence tests have been criticized for many years for bias against racial and ethnic minorities, because marginalized and underrepresented groups tend to score lower than white and middle-class individuals. Intelligence changes with experience, which is impossible to assess well using an intelligence test. Since individuals from different cultural groups have different values and face different demands from their environments, the behaviors needed to successfully adapt to their environments can be quite different. For example, Aboriginal people in Australia rely more on visual skills on memory tasks and approach spatial relationships differently than non-Aboriginal Australians. Rock and Price, 2019. This study, Rock and Price, 2019, uses the terms Aboriginal Australians and non-Aboriginal Australians. Thus, what is needed to adapt to the environment, and thus what is considered intelligent, often differs across populations and cultures. One solution has been to develop culture-free tests of intelligence intended to eliminate cultural bias completely. More recently, these tests have been referred to as culture-fair tests. To be truly culture-free or culture-fair, tests need to identify and assess universal skills that occur across cultures. Some versions of these culture-free tests also focus on assessments using nonverbal skills, such as determining the next pattern in a series of patterns. Raven, 2000. However, recent research suggests that even culture-free tests need to be adapted to the culture of the child to accurately assess cognitive performance. Lozano Ruiz et al., 2021. Ultimately, counselors, teachers, and other professionals should focus more on the child being tested and less on the score. Since intelligence tests measure how a child has developed cognitively as a result of their life experiences, the tests may not fully capture the cognitive strengths of a child and should be considered only one piece of the puzzle. Variations in intelligence. The intellectual abilities of children vary considerably, and types of intellectual strengths may vary across children. Additionally, ranges include extremes in intellectual ability, such as intellectual disabilities and intellectual giftedness, that may impact academic achievement. Intellectual disability. Since IQ scores are normally distributed, few children will have extremely high or extremely low scores. In fact, about 2% of children will score below 70, which is often used as the part of the criteria for diagnosing intellectual disability. An intellectual disability typically is diagnosed when an individual has a very low IQ that creates limits in intellectual functioning and has challenges in adaptive behavior or handling the tasks associated with daily life. Many children who have intellectual disabilities will need support throughout their lives, although some go on to live independently. Some common causes of intellectual disabilities include genetic conditions, pregnancy or birth complications, and exposure to diseases, toxins, or teratogens. Lee et al., 2023. Individuals between the ages of 3 and 21 who are diagnosed with an intellectual disability or other developmental or learning disability qualify for special education services through their local school district. These services are individualized for each child's unique needs. Heward, 2018. In the United States, as well as in some other countries like Canada, it is legally required that children with disabilities are placed in a least restrictive environment. In the United States, the least restrictive environment is mandated by the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, which states that children with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate education, U.S. Department of Education. In some cases, this may include a separate environment or a classroom that is designed to be as similar as possible to other classrooms. In other cases, children with disabilities will be integrated into mainstream academic classrooms. This approach to education is called inclusion. Children with disabilities in a mainstream classroom may also have a teacher or teacher's assistant who works directly with that child. Mastropieri and Scruggs, 2007. Inclusive practices have been shown to be beneficial to children across multiple countries and resource levels, and is most impactful when supported by effective teacher training, accessible facilities, and inclusion of individual and small group instruction. Mendoza and Heyman, 2024. Giftedness. Approximately 2% of children will score above an IQ of 130, often considered one of the markers for giftedness or accelerated learning, although there is no universally accepted definition. National Association for Gifted Children, 2018. Intellectually gifted children may have significant strengths in cognitive flexibility and specific ability areas, such as music or geography, in addition to advanced cognitive performance. Castajean et al., 2016. Gifted children often go on to achieve a high level of professional success. Schlager, 2022. Although gifted children learn easily, they still need support from schools to achieve their potential and stay curious, engaged learners. In elementary school, teaching gifted children may involve providing opportunities for children to cover the same curriculum as other children, but in greater depth. Olszewski, Kubilius, and Thompson, 2015. As they get older, gifted children are typically placed in accelerated classes that move through the curriculum more quickly than standard classes. They may remain in their current grade but take some classes with older students, or they may skip an entire grade. Despite concerns that gifted children who move through school more quickly will struggle emotionally or socially, most research has not found any negative social or emotional outcomes. Jolly and Matthews, 2012. In fact, most gifted children are happiest when they are with older peers at the same cognitive level than when they are with children of the same age. Nehart, 2021. Educators, caregivers, and psychologists also discuss and sometimes debate the terminology itself. They propose alternative names for students with high IQ or similar test outcomes, including high ability, high aptitude, accelerated learner, and so on. There is no consensus that the term itself causes distress or concern among either students termed gifted or other students in their schools and communities. Tamika is starting in a new school. Her last school was very academic, and the teachers provided a highly structured curriculum, supporting students as they learned. Her new school encourages children to be much more creative and unrestricted in their learning, and the classroom is full of centers that allow active, hands-on experimentation for this purpose. Tamika's foster mother is excited about this new way of learning, but worries that it may be harder for Tamika to grasp all the important concepts she will need for the future. Education is a key part of the daily lives of most children during middle childhood. The cognitive advancements you studied earlier in this chapter allow children to learn more efficiently and to think in more sophisticated ways. Throughout this time, children are becoming much more proficient in mathematics, reading, and writing. The educational experiences they have now are the foundation for their attitudes about formal learning and will affect their success in school up to and even beyond adolescence. Schooling as a context for middle childhood. In most countries, children spend a significant part of their daily lives in school, where they are taught the cognitive skills that will help them to be successful as adults. According to Robinson and Robinson, 2022, schooling serves 4 important purposes for children. 1. To engage with their world. 2. To understand their culture and respect diversity. 3. To become economically independent. And 4. To become productive citizens. In many places, it is easy to take children's ability to go to school for granted and to assume that this opportunity has always been available. However, in most countries, attending school has only been possible for fewer than 200 years. In the United States, public education began during the colonial period in New England, where Puritans required children to learn reading, writing, and religion. Crooks, 2023. However, in other colonies, only a very small percentage of children attended school, and it was usually only boys and those from the wealthiest families. By the end of the 1800s, free compulsory education became widespread across the country, which meant that all children could receive a formal education, regardless of the social status of their family. Formal education now served to unify the country, as well as to encourage immigrants to assimilate. Changes in job opportunities and city structures in the late 1800s to early 1900s, due to industrialization, also required individuals to have higher rates of literacy. Although free mandatory education is available throughout the United States, this option is not universal around the globe. Across the world, approximately 16% of children do not attend school. UNESCO 2023. In many parts of the world, girls have less access to education due to gender inequality, poverty, early marriage, and/or gender-based violence. UNESCO 2023. Although only 2% of countries explicitly restrict the rights of girls to attend school, only 33% of countries protect their rights to an education. As well as providing critical academic achievements, schools offer a context for children to develop social competencies, as well as skills that will allow them to fully participate in society as they achieve adult independence. Formal schooling also provides necessary care for children during the day so that parents can work. In addition, because teachers are mandatory reporters and are often more familiar with typical development than many parents, formal schooling provides a potential pathway for the early detection of developmental delays, child maltreatment, or other health risks that may negatively impact child development and academic success. School environments and influences. During middle childhood, learning can take place through formal education provided by teachers and other specially trained professionals. Important learning also happens through informal education, which can take place anywhere, including at home. Informal settings may be particularly useful for combating disparities in education. For example, participation in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Programs in informal settings, such as museums, science centers, zoos, and aquariums, are associated with less stereotypical beliefs about gender and STEM engagement, likely because children are exposed to educators and professionals that do not fit the typical gender stereotypes. McGuire et al., 2020. Theoretical approaches to education. Theories of education can influence the way teachers approach education in their classrooms. Two such theories are behaviorism and constructivism. Behaviorism, as an educational philosophy, focuses on the idea that student behavior can be influenced by the classroom environment. A teacher provides a stimulus to which the student responds, and the teacher positively reinforces the desired response or punishes an undesired response. Ultimately, the teacher is using behavioral techniques to achieve results, like effective learning. Positive reinforcement is a consequence for behavior that increases the likelihood the behavior will be repeated. Some examples include praising a child for providing a correct response, giving extra recess time for completed homework, and hanging exemplary work in the classroom. Similarly, teachers may use punishments for undesirable behaviors that are designed to decrease the likelihood that a behavior will be repeated. Some examples are sending a misbehaving student to the principal's office, giving a student detention for failing to complete homework, or calling parents to report misbehavior in the classroom. Given the many benefits of positive reinforcement for changing behaviors, best practices for schools focus on positive reinforcement for managing student behavior. Wilkins et al., 2023. However, relying solely on rewards and punishments to control student behavior may lead to learning just for the rewards, extrinsic motivation, rather than learning for the sake of learning. Intrinsic motivation. Ryan and Deci, 2020. Since intrinsic motivation is associated with better academic achievement, Burton et al., 2006. Educators should balance the use of behaviorist techniques with opportunities for students to learn through engaging assignments designed to address relevant real-world problems, to allow students to choose what they learn, or to demonstrate their learning through portfolios. Mathewson, 2019. Jean Piaget proposed the idea of constructivism, which suggests that students play an active role in acquiring knowledge by constructing it through experience, rather than just passively receiving information. Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of cognitive development offered another view, arguing that cognitive development happens through the social interactions that occur when adults or more capable peers guide children's learning in the zone of proximal development. Miller, 2011. The zone of proximal development consists of the knowledge or skills the student doesn't yet have but can achieve with the help of someone else. The teaching method that helps students learn in this model is referred to as scaffolding, which is when students receive support from more capable individuals to acquire new knowledge or develop new skills. Figure 7.15. In a classroom setting, constructivism becomes a teaching strategy, in which teachers guide children to think for themselves and encourage collaboration for problem solving. The teacher becomes a facilitator who guides learning, rather than an individual who provides direct instruction. Formal schooling. In the United States, formal schooling typically begins around age 5 or 6, when a child enters kindergarten, although the age at which schooling is required varies by state. Some researchers have argued that 7 is the most appropriate age for beginning formal schooling. Whitebread and Bingham, 2013. In fact, that is when many children start formal schooling in other countries, including Afghanistan, Indonesia, and Niger. In contrast, other countries, including Trinidad and Tobago, New Zealand, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, have children start their primary education when they are as young as 5. The World Bank, 2023. 7 is also the age at which Piaget proposed that children enter the concrete operational stage and become capable of using logic and solving concrete problems. Regardless of the age at which formal schooling begins, middle childhood is synonymous with school age and is a period of critical learning. Formal schooling provides education in a systematic and organized manner. It focuses on achieving specific learning goals with the aid of a trained educator and a formal learning environment. The methods and classroom settings can vary from highly structured to more student-driven but still teacher-guided. Figure 7.16. Classrooms that are characterized by direct instruction from a teacher are teacher-centered classrooms. Heal, 2023. Teachers are the focus and have full control over what happens in the classroom. Students take a more passive role and learn through drills, quizzing, and presentations. Although this method ensures that students will be exposed to all relevant topics, it may be less engaging for some and does not encourage children to direct their own learning. It also does not encourage collaboration or critical thinking. Student-centered classrooms, on the other hand, are characterized by equal interactions between students and teachers. Heal, 2023. This teaching method leans heavily on ideas by Piaget and Vygotsky. It encourages children to actively construct their own learning by engaging in problem-solving activities and collaborative learning with peers. Khadija, 2020. Montessori and Waldorf models of education are built around the idea of student-centered education. Atfield, 2022. Maverick, 2020. The teacher functions as a guide who encourages exploration and challenges children to think more deeply, reflecting on the process rather than on specific facts. Disadvantages of this method include the possibility of noisy or chaotic classrooms, difficulties with managing group work, and the risk that students may miss some important facts because instruction is not directly delivered to all. In addition to the more formalized, official curriculum outlined in the lesson plans, the hidden curriculum is a set of unspoken, unofficial, and often unintended rules and values that students learn while attending school. The hidden curriculum, first described by Philip Jackson, 1968, is seen in the way the school is organized, the way students are assigned to classes, and the schedules and physical characteristics of the school. For example, students who attend a school with a strict dress code receive an implicit message about the importance of conformity over individuality and self-expression. Friedrich and Shanks, 2023. The hidden curriculum can influence students in both positive and negative ways. Halstead and Shao, 2023. It often reinforces the values and expectations of society by teaching social skills and providing students with skills and knowledge they need to succeed in the real world, like effective time management and collaboration. For example, children may improve their patience and collaboration skills through taking turns during classroom activities. However, the hidden curriculum may also reinforce stereotypes or exert other negative influences on children. For example, schools that have metal detectors may reinforce the idea that school is a dangerous place, and schools that have classrooms filled with signs about rules without interesting art or educational images may reinforce the idea that learning is never fun. In 2001, the No Child Left Behind Act mandated that schools regularly administer achievement tests to measure knowledge and skills children have learned. Redding and Nguyen, 2020. No Child Left Behind was controversial for several reasons, and in 2015 it was replaced with the Every Student Succeeds Act. The new law is viewed as more flexible, but maintains significant requirements for testing and score reporting. The scores are published so parents, educators, and government officials can examine performance within schools, as well as within demographics, such as social class and racial and ethnic groups. The goal of the tests is to increase student learning and academic achievement by holding educators accountable for student performance, and scores are often used to make decisions about how federal and/or state funding is distributed to schools. As a result of their serious consequences, these are often referred to as high-stakes tests. Egan and Stobart, 2016. High-stakes testing is very controversial. Bradbury et al., 2021. Supporters argue that these tests provide important information about student knowledge and skill acquisition, and that they encourage teachers to use more effective teaching strategies. However, critics claim that this type of testing is unfair to teachers and students in schools with inequitable resources, and, as a result, there are significant socioeconomic and ethnic disparities in performance on these tests. Specifically, high-stakes tests harm more students of color and English language learners. Solorzano, 2019. In addition, because the test results are so influential, schools are often criticized for teaching to the test and for putting too much focus on scores. The curriculum may then be less engaging for students and not allow for student-centered learning. Students and teachers often may feel punished for test scores, particularly when pressure to improve scores can be at the expense of recess and extracurricular classes such as music. Finally, teachers have less agency over what and how they teach because of the pressure to prepare students for these high-stakes tests, and as a result, report lower levels of motivation, which negatively impacts student performance and increases student stress. Acosta et al. 2020, Heisel et al. 2021. Schools may be able to reduce these negative impacts by providing mental health support and maintaining a positive learning environment that maintains extracurriculars such as the arts. Heisel et al. 2021, Ishiguro et al. 2023. Informal schooling. Informal schooling takes place outside the traditional classroom and includes extracurricular activities and any other learning that may take place in daily life. For example, parents regularly teach their children skills, such as tying their shoes, completing chores around the house, and helping at mealtime. Peers are also a source of learning when children gain knowledge and discover new interests through interactions with friends and classmates. Up until the 1970s, most children in the United States attended formal schooling environments. Since then, there has been an increasing number of students who have been homeschooled. Gaither, 2017. Homeschooling can take many different forms, but is generally any form of education that takes place outside of a traditional school environment. Carlson, 2020. Homeschools may be led by one adult or a group of them, may be structured and regulated or completely lacking in requirements, and may be done in peer groups or one-on-one. In the United States, there was a significant increase in homeschooling due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2019, approximately 3 to 4% of children were homeschooled, and by the 2021-2022 school year, about 6% of school-aged children were homeschooled. Ray, 2024. Homeschooling is also growing in many other countries, including Australia, Canada, France, Kenya, Russia, the Republic of Korea, and Thailand. Ray, 2024. However, homeschooling is much less common in other countries, such as Italy, Israel, Chile, and Turkey. Neumann, 2019. And is illegal in others, including Germany, Cuba, Brazil, and China. Barbosa, 2016. Shang, 2018. Families choose homeschooling for a variety of reasons. These include the ability to customize the curriculum and learning environment for individual children, including those with unique learning needs, the ability to protect minority children from racism and lowered expectations that schools may have for children of color, or the ability to focus on a particular set of values and beliefs. Field-Smith, 2020. In fact, the most common reasons parents reported for homeschooling were concern over the school environment, being unhappy with previous academic instruction received at school, or wanting to provide specific religious or moral instruction to their children. McQuiggan et al., 2017. While the goal of homeschooling may be to support a child's unique learning needs, the lack of regulation and the lack of access to special education services may mean some children with disabilities receive less support in certain homeschool environments. Carlson, 2020. There are both advantages and disadvantages to homeschooling. Homeschoolers may have less opportunity to engage in organized group activities, which may limit their ability to develop teamwork strategies and practice social skills. Sikarsky, 2024. However, if children are involved in extracurricular activities and homeschooling cooperatives that give them opportunities to socialize with other children, they can effectively develop these social skills. Farraco et al., 2022. Children who are homeschooled often do as well as or better than children attending formal school on standardized academic achievement tests. Ray, 2017-2024. Homeschooled adolescents describe advantages, like more choices in learning, greater confidence and imagination, and strong family support. Figure 7.17. As well as disadvantages, including lower test-taking and social skills, lower motivation, and fewer friendships. Neumann, 2020. Overall, the advantages and disadvantages of homeschooling can be quite difficult to determine due to the lack of regulation across various states and countries, the wide variability in quality, and the difficulty of researching homeschooled children who receive the least structured and regulated forms of homeschooling. Regardless of whether they are homeschooled or attend a traditional formal school, many children spend time participating in extracurricular activities. These structured activities are voluntary and are supervised by adults. Mahoney et al., 2005. They include organized sports, arts programs for music or dance, gaming clubs, 4-H, and other community programs such as scouting, public library programs, or after-school programs. In 2020, 44% of boys and 35% of girls were on a sports team, while 37% of girls and 27% of boys took music, dance, or other types of lessons. Mael Garcia, 2022. Although participation in extracurricular activities has increased over the past 2 decades, significant disparities in participation by income status and neighborhood type exist. For example, children in poverty are less likely to participate in extracurriculars due to limited resources and parental time for transportation and financial limitations in paying for equipment or fees. Mael Garcia, 2022. Children living in more metropolitan areas are also more likely to engage in extracurricular sports. Johnson et al., 2023. Participation in extracurricular activities has several positive benefits for children, including better mental health, higher academic performance, more positive social relationships, increased self-esteem, improved social skills, and fewer risky behaviors. Ometra and Poulin, 2018. Oberle et al., 2019. Vandel et al., 2015. However, concerns have been raised about the potential negative effects on mental health, sleep, and social life of being involved in too many extracurricular activities. Hitano et al., 2023. As a result, caregivers should encourage their child, Ren, to choose a couple of activities at a time and to make sure that they also have some unscheduled time. Life hacks. The overscheduled child. In a world where there are so many options for extracurricular activities for children, is there such a thing as too much? Many children, whose parents have the financial means and schedule flexibility, can participate in multiple activities, including organized sports teams, dance, gymnastics, martial arts, scouting, or music lessons, all of which may have social, physical, or cognitive benefits. Oktomovna, 2024. However, research has suggested that too many extracurricular activities may not be beneficial and may even be harmful for children. For example, some researchers have coined the term hurried child syndrome, which refers to children who have overfilled schedules and who are pushed to be academically successful and to succeed in numerous extracurricular activities. Kashyap and Sharma, 2022. These children have more physical health problems, higher levels of stress, reduced creativity, and social isolation. Halamani, 2023. In response, there is a growing movement to provide children with more downtime to relax. Unstructured time is associated with improved life skills and allows for quality family time. Walsh, 2017. Since there are benefits to participation in extracurricular activities as well as for unstructured leisure time, adults should strive to balance the opportunities to develop skills and passions through participation in extracurricular activities with some unstructured free time. Influences on academic achievement. Regardless of school context, formal or informal, students are influenced by a variety of people and issues in their educational experience. For example, the Pygmalion effect is the impact of teacher expectations on student academic achievement. Rosenthal and Jacobson, 1968. These expectancies may come from experiences with individual students, but are also based on teacher bias. For example, studies have shown that when teachers believe boys are better at math or girls are better at reading, children perform to these expectations, even when their actual abilities are not consistent with the teacher's beliefs. Plante et al., 2013, Rettelsdorf et al., 2015. Such bias may explain, in part, why there are gender gaps in reading and math during middle childhood. Friedrich et al., 2015. A recent report shows that girls outperform boys in reading. Global Education Monitoring Report Team, 2022. For example, in Saudi Arabia, 77% of girls but only 51% of boys reach a minimum proficiency in reading. Although it is smaller, the gender gap for reading also favors girls in other countries, such as the Dominican Republic, Lithuania, Morocco, Thailand, and Norway. On the other hand, boys perform better than girls in mathematics during middle childhood, though this gender gap disappears by adolescence. Global Education Monitoring Report Team, 2022. In other research, around half of countries studied had gender equity in math and science achievement. Mullis et al., 2020. Gender gaps in science and math are less likely to be present in more gender-equal societies. Global Educational Monitoring Report Team, 2022. However, boys continue to be overrepresented in careers requiring both math and science, suggesting that gender stereotypes and biases continue to influence the academic choices of children and extend into STEM careers and other career selections. Student beliefs and motivations also influence academic achievement. Those with high self-efficacy, which Albert Bandura defined as confidence in their ability to solve a problem or complete a task, and who believe they can be successful, achieve more than students without self-efficacy. Musu Gillette et al. 2015. Students who believe they can be successful in school tend to be more motivated in school. For example, students with high self-efficacy set higher goals for themselves to achieve, work harder, are more persistent in their pursuit of those goals, and outperform peers with lower self-efficacy. Haneke et al. 2023. Similarly, both intrinsic and extrinsic motivations can promote better learning and academic achievement. Burton et al. 2006. Mathewson 2019. For example, students are likely to learn more effectively when they enjoy what they are learning and may expect a reward, such as a good grade, due to their efforts. According to Carol Dweck's mindset theory, students with a growth mindset have more positive developmental outcomes than those with a fixed mindset. The belief that their abilities are fixed and can't be changed. Dweck et al. 2019. If 10-year-old Mario approaches a challenging assignment by saying, "This looks hard, but I think I can do it if I work hard," he is demonstrating a growth mindset. Having a growth mindset is associated with less anxiety and depression. Schleider and Weiss, 2016. As well as with improved grades and increased enrollment in more advanced courses in math. Yeager et al. 2019. However, the growth mindset is most effective if reinforced by teachers who endorse the learner's beliefs. Yeager et al. 2022. For example, if a student insists they are not good at math, a teacher may reinforce a fixed mindset by saying, "Maybe math isn't your strength, but you do other things well." However, the teacher may encourage a growth mindset by stating, "Let's keep working on this problem. I've seen you make great progress this year when you keep trying on a problem." Life hacks. Develop a growth mindset. A growth mindset is the belief that our cognitive abilities can be changed, while a fixed mindset is the belief that those abilities are stable. Although the positive impacts of a growth mindset have been supported by research, findings are mixed about whether academic outcomes are higher for children with a growth mindset. Yeager and Dweck, 2020. Other research has shown that interventions designed to change students' mindsets do not influence student achievement. McNamara and Burgoyne, 2023. One possible reason is that schools send mixed messages to children when they promote a growth mindset while at the same time focusing on performance outcomes. In addition, students likely come into the school year with a particular mindset as the result of past experiences with other teachers, their families, and peers. Another criticism of growth mindset theory is that it underestimates the effects of innate abilities, such as intelligence, and that it can make children feel like they are entirely responsible for their outcomes. In turn, that ignores the fact that many factors outside children's control, such as poverty and systemic racism, have a real impact on academic achievement. Alexander, 2015. Despite these criticisms, having a growth mindset is more likely to promote positive outcomes than having a fixed mindset. So what are some strategies that support developing a growth mindset? According to Carol Dweck, 2014, who first identified mindset theory, there are several steps that can help. Praise wisely. In other words, praise should focus on effort and perseverance over intelligence or talent. For example, "You tried so hard" is preferable to "You must be so smart." Reward wisely. Rewards, such as good grades, should be based on effort and strategy instead of exclusively on correct answers. Remember the word "yet." In other words, if there is a setback or failure, it isn't permanent, and a lot of learning can occur through mistakes and persistence. Change mindsets by being willing to persevere at challenging and difficult tasks. To learn more about Carol Dweck's research and tips, review this brief presentation on developing a growth mindset from Dweck, Diversity in Learning. We can observe a wide range in children's ability to learn. Most schools are structured for neurotypical learners, so they need to give special consideration to students who are more advanced learners or who have learning disabilities. Learning disabilities, a condition that affects learning in a specific academic area, such as reading, writing, math, or speech, is called a learning disability. They are some of the most common disabilities diagnosed in children. American Psychiatric Association, 2022. To diagnose a learning disability, a child will be given a variety of assessments, which may include an IQ test and a test of academic achievement. Learning disabilities are not due to an intellectual impairment or other physical or sensory disability and do not reflect the child's intelligence. Swanson, 2023. Thus, a child with a learning disability has a significant gap between their overall ability and their achievement in a specific cognitive area. A common learning disability that results in difficulties in reading is known as dyslexia, Vaughn et al. 2024. Characteristics include poor spelling and problems reading from left to right, and difficulties associating letters with sounds. Dyslexia is likely due to differences in the areas of the brain responsible for language and reading. Kirshner 2019. Dyslexia occurs in approximately 7% of children, with rates varying by country. Yang et al. 2022. For example, Nigeria has a rate of 11%, while Slovakia has a rate of 2%. These differences may be due in part to differences in writing systems across languages. Siak and Quinn 2022. Relatedly, dysgraphia is a learning disability in writing and often occurs with dyslexia. Chung et al. 2020. Children may have difficulties sounding out words, writing them phonetically, or forming letters with pen or pencil. They may write text that is poorly organized on the page or have trouble with spelling, grammar, and punctuation. These difficulties may persist into adulthood. McCloskey and Rapp 2017. Approximately 10 to 30% of children have some difficulties with their writing. However, the actual prevalence of dysgraphia is dependent on how it is defined. A child may be diagnosed with dyscalculia, a learning disability in math. Butterworth 2005. Children may have difficulties learning basic math rules, using math symbols, understanding math problems, or understanding how numbers work. Rates of dyscalculia are similar to the rates of dyslexia. Monay and Pedro 2017. Although they may vary by country and geographical region. Keong et al. 2016. For example, rates of dyscalculia are higher in rural areas than in urban areas. Keong et al. 2016. Causes of dyscalculia include biological factors, differences in brain functioning, and specific cognitive deficits. Skagerland and Traff 2014. Fortunately, interventions have been shown to be effective in helping children who are having difficulty learning mathematics. Monet and Pedro 2017. Attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Neurodevelopmental disorders emerge during childhood as the nervous system develops. These disorders negatively impact a child's ability to function in one or more settings, such as home and school. One of the more common neurodevelopmental disorders is attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, which is characterized by inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, and deficits in executive functions. Peterson et al. 2024. There are 3 ways it can present itself based on which symptoms are most problematic. Table 7.5. Const et al. 2014. This discussion of ADHD focuses on childhood diagnosis and experiences, but ADHD often persists into adulthood and may also be initially diagnosed in adults. A child with ADHD may struggle to attend to some tasks, like schoolwork, but may be hyperattentive to other tasks that they find rewarding or interesting, like rock collecting or playing video games. Other symptoms of inattention include a failure to follow instructions, lack of attention to detail, and easily becoming distracted. Kai et al. 2023. Signs of hyperactivity in children with ADHD include excessive movement, fidgeting, squirming, difficulty remaining seated, and talkativeness. Ayano et al. 2023. They may also be more impulsive than other children. For example, they may shout out the answers to questions in class before they are called on or not consider the safety implications of running to grab a ball that rolled into the street. Children with ADHD also often have deficits in executive functioning. For example, research has shown that impaired spatial working memory and inhibitory control among children with ADHD. Rastakerdar et al. 2023. Children with ADHD do not have any intellectual impairments when compared to children without ADHD, but they may struggle in school because of their difficulties with executive functioning. For example, they may not give themselves enough time to complete large projects, or they may forget to turn in completed homework. As a result, compared to children who do not have ADHD, children with ADHD may have lower grades in school, higher rates of grade retention, and of dropping out of school. Inez et al. 2023. ADHD occurs in approximately 5% of children between 3 and 12 years of age. Solari et al. 2023, a rate that has increased over the past several decades. It's likely that actual cases have not been rising, but that teachers, parents, and medical professionals are more aware of and more likely to recognize the symptoms and refer children for a diagnosis. Diagnostic techniques and screening processes have also improved, making it easier to diagnose a child. Abdelnour et al. 2022. Boys are 3 times more likely than girls to be diagnosed with ADHD. Rubin and Elgadal, 2024. Boys with ADHD are also more likely to display externalizing behaviors, such as increased running and impulsivity, whereas girls are more likely to show internalizing behaviors, such as low self-esteem and inattentiveness. The externalizing behaviors are more likely to be disruptive at home or at school, and may explain, in part, why boys are more likely to be diagnosed. Molam et al., 2019. However, if all children in a community are screened, gender differences in the diagnosis of ADHD disappear. Asari, 2021, supporting the idea that higher rates of ADHD are due to more noticeable symptoms. Globally, rates of ADHD vary from one country to another. For example, research has reported that approximately 8% of Turkish children have ADHD, Zorlu et al., 2020, while about 18% of children in Tunisia, Mahala et al., 2018, and 1/4 of children in South Africa have ADHD, De Melander et al., 2020. There are also racial disparities in diagnosis. Rates of ADHD are higher in Black children than in white children. Hispanic children are less likely to receive a diagnosis of ADHD than white children. Shi et al., 2021. The reasons for these disparities are not completely understood, but some research has suggested that cultural values impact the likelihood that parents will seek a diagnostic evaluation for their children. Bradley, 2007. And that systemic racism may impact both the diagnosis and treatment of ADHD. Johnson et al., 2017. There are several possible causes for ADHD, including genetics, preterm birth, and maternal use of substances like acetaminophen during pregnancy. Banashevsky et al., 2017. G et al., 2020. Kim et al., 2020. Sarander et al., 2019. More than 76 potential risk genes have been identified for ADHD, DeMontis et al., 2023, and many of these are important for the regulation of the neurotransmitter dopamine. There is also research that has linked structures in the brain to ADHD. Most of these studies have focused on the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex, and suggest that the frontal lobe is less developed in individuals with this diagnosis. Hugman et al., 2019. Since the frontal lobe is responsible for executive functions, attention, impulse control, and planning, delays in frontal lobe development explain many of the behaviors seen in children with this disorder. Importantly, despite widely held beliefs, there is no evidence that sugar consumption is related to increased hyperactivity. Kramer, 2023. And although food additives have been shown to increase hyperactivity, the overall impact is very small. McCann et al., 2007. Appropriate treatments, including medication and therapy, can significantly improve outcomes among individuals with ADHD. Arnold et al., 2015. One of the most frequent treatments is medication. In particular, the use of stimulants such as Ritalin, Vyvanse, and Adderall have been shown to increase dopamine activity and to have benefits for academic performance and reduced risk behaviors. Faraone et al., 2021. Storbo et al., 2023. Increasingly, medications for ADHD also involve the use of non-stimulant medications such as Strattera and Wellbutrin. Isaac et al., 2024. Although it may seem unusual to prescribe a stimulant to children with symptoms of hyperactivity, these medications activate the prefrontal cortex and frontal lobe. However, there is quite a bit of controversy about the use of medications to control symptoms. There are problematic side effects, which include disrupted sleep, decreased appetite, and headaches, as well as concerns that the use of stimulant medication can lead to people developing tolerance and/or withdrawal symptoms, leading to the need for progressively increased doses and potential overuse or misuse. Lovett et al., 2024. As a result, many parents may prefer to consider other treatment options. One of the most common treatments is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, a type of therapy that helps children change negative thought processes to more positive thought processes. Children with ADHD who have received CBT have better long-term outcomes than children treated with medication. Raja et al., 2017. Furthermore, the combination of CBT and medications has the most benefits, likely because the medication has an immediate effect that gives the child the focus to gain the most benefit from CBT. Li and Zhang, 2023. Educational services for exceptional learners. You may have heard the term exceptional learner, which is currently used to describe a child who has a variety of special needs. Hallahan et al., 2020. Starting in the 1970s, important federal laws were passed in the United States that have increased the rights of children with disabilities. In 1973, The Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504, Place 93112 was passed. This law mandates that any individual with disabilities needs to be accommodated in any program that receives federal funding. Since 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, has prohibited any kind of discrimination on the basis of a disability. This law extends its protections beyond organizations receiving federal funding to cover employment, and it also requires that accommodations be made in public facilities like restrooms and public transportation. In school settings, this legislation led to accommodations like wheelchair-accessible doorways and restrooms. Figure 7.18. In the United States, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act ensures that any child with a disability from birth to age 21 has access to free and appropriate education. United States Department of Education, 2024. The law also included specific provisions, such as that education for a child with a disability should take place in the least restrictive environment, meaning that wherever possible, children should be included in general education, with peers who do not have disabilities. This law also requires public schools to provide an individualized educational program, IEP, to any child who receives special education and/or related services. An IEP is a written plan that spells out the specific educational goals and services that have been individualized for a student with a disability. The specific services vary based on the child's individual needs and might include physical therapy, speech/language therapy, occupational therapy, and counseling. 8-year-old Troy's aunt has noticed that his vocabulary has grown considerably and that she can now have detailed conversations with him about his day, as well as about his hopes and dreams. He still makes some grammatical errors when he's speaking, but they are becoming less frequent. He's also starting to love puns and knock-knock jokes, which makes conversations with him so much more fun. And he loves sharing that he can count to 10 in Spanish, French, and Mandarin, all thanks to a new initiative in his elementary school to expose children to world languages at an earlier age. Language skills continue to develop during middle childhood, which is when children become much more effective communicators, both verbally and non-verbally. In this section, you'll explore some of the major milestones they achieve before considering the benefits and challenges of multilingualism in middle childhood. Language milestones. By middle childhood, children can easily express their thoughts and engage in full conversations. But language is complicated and continues to develop throughout childhood. There are significant increases in vocabulary, and children continue to learn grammatical rules. They also learn that language changes when communicating with people in different social contexts. Adults versus peers, for example. Children also make great strides in their reading abilities during middle childhood, which will become one of the major ways in which they learn as they get older. Facets of language development that improve in middle childhood, including vocabulary and grammar, pragmatic skills, and reading skills. Vocabulary and grammar. Vocabulary increases dramatically in middle childhood and is associated with other developmental outcomes. Vocabulary is important for reading as well as for language processing. Lee et al., 2021. Children with larger vocabulary sizes are also better at describing and recognizing emotions. Beck et al., 2012. As children get older, they become more aware of the qualities of language and can think about and evaluate language, a skill known as metalinguistic awareness. Simard and Gutierrez, 2017. For example, in addition to mastering new words, children begin to learn that many words have similar meanings and can refer to the same object or action, such as animal and mammal. They also begin to understand that one word can have multiple meanings. For example, duck can refer to an animal or an action. This new ability is one of the reasons children begin to appreciate humor, puns, and eventually sarcasm. For example, in the preceding vignette, Troy loves jokes. He might enjoy one like this. What did baby corn say to mama corn? Answer: where is popcorn? What fuels the vocabulary explosion seen during middle childhood? Certainly, our everyday experiences are important for introducing us to specific words. Learning vocabulary is closely tied to reading, too, as well as to socioeconomic status. Vanderkleije et al., 2022. Children from lower socioeconomic statuses tend to be exposed to less language with less diverse vocabulary, which has consequences for vocabulary development and for reading. Lervag et al., 2019. Vocabulary has also been shown to grow significantly during the school year, but less so during summer holidays, particularly among low SES children. Vanderkleije et al., 2022. More grammatical rules become familiar during middle childhood. Children begin studying the parts of language and sentence structure, as one element of their formal schooling. They also begin to understand more complex grammar, such as passive voice, the baby is being fed, and conditional sentences. If I had been home, I would have finished my chores. For English-speaking children, grasping these more complex grammatical structures depends on gaining more experience with and exposure to sophisticated language and sentence structure. Thus, it takes longer to master these types of sentences than sentences that use active voice. The baby is eating. However, in other cultures that use more passive voice sentences, children understand and use the passive voice earlier. For example, in northern East Cree, a language spoken by Indigenous peoples in Canada, children use the passive voice much earlier than do children who are speaking English. Henke et al., 2024. Pragmatics. As children get older, they continue to learn to change their speech in response to the needs of the listener. As discussed in 5.4 Language in Early Childhood, pragmatics is the way we use language in different social contexts and a useful tool for developing social relationships with others. It requires understanding 1. How to use language for different functions such as requesting something, telling a story, or conveying knowledge. 2. How to use written language differently across contexts such as text messages versus emails or writing an essay for school. 3. How to change language to meet the needs of listeners as different as a grandparent and a friend, or to speak up in a noisy room. And 4. The hidden rules of conversation such as taking turns and using eye contact, body gestures, and facial expressions. The use of pragmatics during middle childhood also includes code switching, which refers to using more than one form of language within a single conversation. Although it is often seen among multilingual speakers, children may also code switch when alternating between speech used in different social contexts, such as speaking differently to peers versus teachers. For example, if you're talking to a peer, you might use more casual language and slang, but quickly switch to more formal language when a teacher calls on you. Although many children are able to learn pragmatics through everyday social interactions, those with certain developmental disabilities may struggle to do so. For example, one study found that children with ADHD scored lower on a pragmatic language assessment than typically developing children, but higher than children with a developmental language disorder. Vasiliou et al., 2023. For example, a child with ADHD might sometimes have difficulty with language pragmatics by frequently interrupting others during conversations or speaking too loudly in a quieter space, which could be distracting or disruptive to peers. Reading. Learning to read and write is a significant milestone for middle childhood. The fundamentals needed for reading, such as spoken language, an understanding of the alphabet and the sounds each letter makes, and the knowledge that spoken sounds correspond to written words, begins during infancy and early childhood. But it is during middle childhood that children coordinate these skills and begin to read. Figure 7.19. Unlike many other developmental skills, reading does not come naturally to most children. In fact, only 5% of children learn to read without help. Willingham, 2015. Reading requires explicit teaching as well as practice. The teaching of reading to children has been approached in several ways. The ongoing debate regarding which method is most effective is often referred to as the reading wars. Castles et al., 2018. There are two primary approaches to teaching reading. The phonics approach helps children understand how to translate letters into sounds and then put those individual sounds together to create words. In essence, children are taught how to sound out words. Unlike many languages, however, English has more sounds, 44, than letters, 26, which makes learning to read it more difficult. Carestes et al., 2024. For example, the letter C can make more than one sound, including the /k for sound as in car, or the /s/ sound as in pencil. Even more confusing is that C can make both sounds within one word, such as council. A second approach to teaching reading, the whole language approach, focuses on teaching reading in natural contexts, such as books, rather than focusing on the sounds that make up words. Since the early 2000s, many schools have adopted a balanced literacy approach, intending to blend the best elements of the phonics-based and whole language methods. In addition to sounding out words phonetically, the balanced approach teaches students to recognize core words, often referred to as sight words in schools, like they or and, as a single word rather than a collection of letters. Phonics is included based on research showing that phonics and phonemic awareness, the ability to identify and manipulate the individual sounds in words, are both important predictors of reading skills. Ferris, 2023. In fact, children who have received instruction on phonics score significantly better on standardized tests of reading. National Early Literacy Panel, 2008. Recent research has also shown that a balanced literacy approach is effective for teaching English language learners. Mir Hosseini and Sharif, 2022.3. Despite this intense focus on how to teach reading, by fourth grade, only 32% of U.S. children are proficient readers. National Assessment of Educational Progress, 2023. Unfortunately, school closures related to the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in a lower rate of proficient readers in elementary school, and the negative impact was worse for students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as for English learners and students with disabilities. Relaya et al., 2023. Point 4. Difficulties learning to read are associated with later challenges in mental health, academic achievement, and vocations. Hendren et al., 2018. Children who are struggling with academic achievement, including reading, are more likely to drop out of school. Lauder et al., 2022. Many continue to have difficulty reading as adults. In fact, about 23% of U.S. adults lack literacy skills, which is defined by the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies as the ability to understand, evaluate, use, and engage with written texts to participate in society, to achieve one's goals, and to develop one's knowledge and potential. Page 61, OECD 2013. Compare this to other countries, such as Costa Rica, where only 4% of the population does not have literacy skills. Intersections and contexts. How much did COVID school closures set students back? COVID-19 school closures had a significant impact on student learning. The pivot to remote learning negatively impacted student academic performance, and many students did not perform at grade level on standardized assessment for both mathematics and reading, both during the closures or after schools reopened. Colvin et al., 2022. Cortez Albornoz et al., 2023. Furthermore, the loss of learning was worse for children living in lower SES families. Moscoviz and Evans, 2022. For example, low-income families had less access to devices and to reliable internet. Francis and Weller, 2022. In low-income households with several school-aged children, students were often forced to share a single device. As a result, many children from lower SES families were forced to drop out of school or received less learning time. Zagalaz Sanchez et al., 2021. The pandemic also increased stressors more for lower-income families, with many households experiencing unemployment or underemployment that led to food and housing insecurity and increases in parental depression and anxiety. Fail et al., 2023. All these factors may have impacted the mental health of children and their parents' ability to help them with schoolwork. Finally, the pandemic increased social isolation in children due to the major disruptions that happen to daily life and activities. Fele et al., 2023. As a result of all these factors, research studies have reported larger losses in learning among children attending schools with higher levels of poverty than among children in lower poverty schools. Kuhfeld et al., 2022.5. It will likely take years to fully recover from this loss of learnings and will require schools to make significant investments in student learning over several years. Fale et al., 2023. Multilingualism. Many children around the world grow up in multilingual households where more than one language is spoken. In the United States, approximately 26% of children are multilingual, a relatively low rate compared to other areas, such as Singapore, 90%, Europe, 67%, and Canada, 55%, although multilingualism is increasing in the United States. Luke, 2017. Wu et al., 2020. It varies quite a bit from state to state, with California having the highest rates at 43% and West Virginia the lowest, around 2%. Annie E. Casey Foundation, 2018. U.S. multilingual children speak a total of more than 100 different languages, but approximately 75% speak Spanish and English. Dietrich and Hernandez, 2022. Thus, in many parts of the United States, multiple languages may be spoken by the children in a single classroom. Even more challenging for teachers is the wide range of abilities among these children. While some may speak more than one language well and may have homes that are multilingual, others may not speak English as well as the language they speak at home. Others may be losing competence in their home language as they become more competent in the language spoken at school. See 2001. Still, others may view English as being more important for the future success than their first or home language, and thus may be less likely to use the latter regularly. Mohammed, 2020. Children who are multilingual must become adept at regularly switching between languages. Tolik and Erica, 2023. A speech style called multilingual code switching or translanguaging. Multilingual code switching requires competency in at least 2 languages and is associated with strongly identifying with 2 cultures. Yim and Klima, et al., 2021. While some children learn multiple languages at the same time beginning at birth, others may learn one language in their early years and then add a second. In this case, it takes longer to master the second language than it does if both languages are learned at the same time. Parody, 2023. The impact of multilingualism on development. Recent research suggests that any disadvantages associated with being bilingual are erased by its numerous advantages. Dentella et al., 2024. These include better executive functioning, memory, selective attention, and analytical reasoning. Nguyen et al., 2023. Plancart et al., 2023. For example, children who speak multiple languages have better cognitive control because they must inhibit one language while they use another. They also have better metalinguistic skills than children who only speak one language. For example, children who are bilingual can understand grammatical rules more easily than children who speak a single language. There are also social benefits to multilingualism, such as being able to participate in diverse communities. Jonov, 2019. There are some challenges associated with multilingualism. Some children may have smaller vocabularies in both languages than children who only speak a single language. Bialystok and Fung, 2011. They may also have difficulties maintaining the language they speak at home. For example, some studies have shown that children who were multilingual before 5 years of age often ended up speaking only the dominant language of the country in which they lived by the time they were 5 years old. Verdin et al., 2014. However, the children of parents who encourage their children to be bilingual have more positive language outcomes than other multilingual children. Mock et al., 2023. Approaches to multilingualism in the classroom. There is a long debate about how best to teach English to multilingual children who are English language learners, ELL, meaning they are not yet proficient in English by the time they start school. Several different strategies exist. Alice Soy, 2024. One consists of immersion programs, which teach all academic subjects in English. These programs are associated with an increased loss of the native language. Another strategy is to begin instruction in the primary language of the student and gradually add in instruction in English. These programs are referred to as developmental bilingual programs. Programs between immersion and developmental bilingual programs are English as a Second Language, ESL, and two-way immersion programs. In ESL programs, all non-English speaking students are taught in a single classroom. Children often spend part of their day learning English in specific ESL classrooms, but there is no accommodation for their native language in other academic classes. In two-way immersion programs, instruction occurs equally in 2 languages. Collier and Thomas, 2017. Since both languages are valued equally, students feel their cultural heritage is respected. They have also been found to have enhanced self-esteem and to retain their native language better than students in other types of bilingual programs. Padrone, 2018. Two-way immersion programs are more effective than immersion programs for the successful learning of English. Lindholm Leary, 2011. However, two-way immersion programs are not universally accepted. Some research has suggested that there may not be positive impacts for all core academic subjects, such as mathematics, reading, and science. Steele et al., 2017. And that there are racial disparities for access to schools that offer this approach to language learning. Flores and Garcia, 2017. In addition, these programs are less common than immersion programs because they require teachers who are highly skilled and fluent in both languages. Two-way immersion is also not practical in schools in which multiple other languages are spoken besides English. Ultimately, the specific method applied often depends on the goals of the school. If the primary goal is to assimilate children into U.S. society and culture, the school will likely use an immersion approach. If the goal is to encourage multiculturalism, the two-way immersion approach is more likely to be effective. Second language education. Children tend to learn new languages more easily than adults. Gassemi and Hashemi, 2011. This may be partly because they are more willing to use the language without fear of making errors. or because their brains have more neural plasticity or flexibility. Birdsong 2017. In addition, non-native speakers who learned a language before the age of 10 are often difficult to distinguish from a native speaker of that language. Gassemi and Hashemi 2011. For this reason, childhood is often referred to as a critical period for the acquisition of a second language. Birdsong 2017. Even adolescents up to age 17 or 18 can learn the grammar structure of a new language more easily than adults. Hartshorn et al. 2018. Despite the clear research showing that children can learn a new language much more easily than they will be able to do so later in life, children often do not begin learning a new language in school until adolescence, if at all. In fact, only about 20% of children in the United States learn a second language during school. Stein-Smith 2019. This is very different than in other countries, where learning a second language is prioritized. For example, in most European countries, learning a second language is required, and students begin learning another language in school between 6 and 9 years of age. Pew Research Center, 2018. Devlin, 2018. Figure 7.20. Taken together, the human ability to learn multiple languages shows how adaptable and resilient the human brain is. The fact that children do such learning with more ease is another example illustrating a sensitive period in lifespan development.